Sarah Martinez had always been the strongest soldier in her unit. At 26, she could outrun most of the men during morning drills and carry equipment that made others struggle. Her fellow soldiers respected her, and her commanding officers praised her dedication. She had joined the Army straight out of college, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that women could excel in combat roles. The deployment to Afghanistan came in her third year of service. Sarah was excited and nervous at the same time. This would be her first real combat mission, and she wanted to show everyone that she belonged there. Her unit was assigned to patrol dangerous areas near Kandahar, where enemy activity was high. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with rocky mountains and desert terrain that tested even the most experienced soldiers. For the first few months, everything went according to plan. Sarah performed her duties flawlessly, earning the trust of her squad members. She was always the first to volunteer for difficult missions and never complained about the challenging conditions. Her squad leader, Sergeant Williams, often told others that Sarah was one of the most reliable soldiers he had ever worked with. The relationship between Sarah and her team was built on mutual respect and shared hardship. They had each other's backs during firefights and supported one another through the mental challenges of being far from home. Sarah felt proud to be part of this brotherhood, even though she was one of only 3 women in the entire battalion. Colonel Harrison was known throughout the base for his strict discipline and no-nonsense attitude. He had been in the military for over 20 years and had served in multiple conflicts. The colonel believed in pushing soldiers to their limits and had little patience for what he considered weakness or excuses. He treated all soldiers equally, regardless of gender, which Sarah initially appreciated. During training exercises, Colonel Harrison would watch the troops with sharp eyes, looking for any sign of hesitation or failure. He believed that only the strongest and most determined soldiers should be on the front lines. His reputation for being tough but fair had earned him respect from most of his subordinates, though some found his methods too harsh. Sarah had heard stories about the colonel's past achievements and his decorations for valor. She hoped to one day earn his respect through her performance and dedication. She knew that impressing Colonel Harrison would be a significant milestone in her military career. The base where they were stationed was a constant hub of activity. Helicopters came and went at all hours, bringing supplies and evacuating wounded soldiers. The sound of gunfire in the distance was a daily reminder of the dangers they faced. Despite the tension, Sarah felt alive and purposeful in this environment. Her daily routine included early morning physical training, weapons maintenance, briefings about enemy movements, and patrol duties. The work was demanding, but Sarah thrived on the challenge. She had found her calling in the military and couldn't imagine doing anything else with her life. As weeks turned into months, Sarah began to understand the true nature of warfare. It wasn't just about physical strength or tactical knowledge. It was about mental resilience, the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure, and the courage to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. She was learning these lessons every day, preparing for challenges she couldn't yet imagine. The mission that changed everything started like any other routine patrol. Sarah's squad was assigned to check a village about 15 miles from their base, where intelligence suggested enemy fighters might be hiding weapons. The morning briefing seemed normal, with standard procedures outlined and contingency plans discussed. Sarah checked her equipment twice, as she always did, making sure her rifle was clean and her communication device was working properly. The convoy of 3 armored vehicles left the base just after sunrise. Sarah was in the second vehicle with 5 other soldiers, including Sergeant Williams and 2 medics. The ride through the desert was bumpy and hot, with dust swirling around them constantly. Through the small windows, Sarah could see the harsh landscape stretching endlessly in every direction. As they approached the village, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, as Sergeant Williams later said. The usual sounds of daily life were missing. No children playing, no merchants calling out their wares, no animals moving around. The squad dismounted from their vehicles and began moving through the narrow streets in formation. Staying alert for any signs of danger, Sarah was walking point, leading the group through an alley between 2 mud brick houses when the first explosion happened. The improvised explosive device had been hidden under a pile of debris, carefully concealed to look like ordinary trash. The blast threw Sarah backward against a wall with tremendous force, and everything went dark for several seconds. When she regained consciousness, Sarah found herself lying on the ground with intense pain shooting through her left arm and shoulder. Her ears were ringing so loudly that she couldn't hear the shouts of her teammates. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see or breathe. She tried to move but felt a sharp, burning sensation across her back and sides. Sergeant Williams reached her first, his face covered with dirt and concern. He was saying something, but Sarah couldn't make out the words through the ringing in her ears. She could see his lips moving and knew he was trying to help, but the pain was overwhelming. Other squad members were setting up a defensive perimeter, while the medics rushed to treat the wounded. The attack had been carefully planned. As soon as the explosion occurred, enemy fighters began shooting from rooftops and windows around the village. Sarah's squad found themselves pinned down in the narrow alley with limited cover. Despite her injuries, Sarah tried to return fire, but her left arm wasn't responding properly, and her vision kept blurring. One of the medics, Corporal Johnson, crawled over to Sarah and began examining her wounds. She could see the concern in his eyes as he cut away parts of her uniform to assess the damage. Pieces of metal and debris had penetrated her jacket and embedded in her skin. Blood was soaking through her clothes, and she was starting to feel dizzy. The firefight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness while her teammates fought to protect her and the other wounded soldiers. She could hear the sound of helicopters approaching in the distance, which meant that reinforcements and medical evacuation were on the way. Eventually, the enemy fighters withdrew, leaving behind a scene of destruction and chaos. Sarah was loaded onto a stretcher and carried to the evacuation helicopter. As they flew back to the base, she looked down at the village where everything had changed. She knew that her life as a soldier would never be the same, but she had no idea how much this incident would test her in the months to come. The medical tent at the base was a place Sarah had never wanted to visit as a patient. The bright lights hurt her eyes, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with dust created an overwhelming sensation. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the chief medical officer, worked quickly to clean and treat Sarah's wounds. The debris had caused multiple lacerations across her back, shoulders, and left arm, some requiring stitches and others needing surgical removal of embedded fragments. Dr. Chen explained that while the wounds were serious, they would heal with proper care and time. However, some of the deeper cuts had damaged muscle tissue and nerves, which could affect Sarah's strength and mobility. The doctor recommended several weeks of rest followed by physical therapy to regain full function. Sarah listened to the medical assessment with growing frustration, knowing that this meant she would be removed from active duty. The pain medication made Sarah feel drowsy and disconnected from everything around her. She spent the first few days after the attack sleeping most of the time, waking only for medical checkups and meals. Her squad members visited whenever they could, bringing news from outside and trying to keep her spirits up. Sergeant Williams told her that the mission had been successful despite the attack, and that intelligence gathered from the village had led to the capture of several enemy fighters. As Sarah began to recover, she started noticing changes in how people treated her. Some soldiers seemed uncomfortable around her, as if they didn't know what to say or how to act. Others were overly sympathetic, speaking to her in gentle tones that made her feel weak and fragile. She missed the easy camaraderie she had shared with her teammates before the attack. The physical therapy sessions were grueling and painful. Sarah had to relearn basic movements that had once been automatic. Lifting her left arm above her head required enormous effort, and carrying any significant weight caused sharp pain across her back. The therapist, a civilian contractor named Mark, was patient and encouraging, but Sarah often felt frustrated with her slow progress. Colonel Harrison visited the medical tent one afternoon while Sarah was doing exercises. He watched her struggle with what should have been simple movements and asked Dr. Chen about her condition. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the colonel shaking his head and making notes on his clipboard. She wondered what he was thinking and whether he doubted her ability to return to full duty. After 3 weeks of treatment, Sarah was cleared to return to light duties around the base. She was assigned to administrative tasks in the command center, far from the action she craved. The work involved updating reports, monitoring radio communications, and organizing supply inventories. While important, these duties felt meaningless compared to the patrol missions and combat operations she had been trained for. Sitting behind a desk all day gave Sarah too much time to think about what had happened. She replayed the attack over and over in her mind, wondering if she could have done something differently to avoid the explosion. The guilt of letting down her team mixed with frustration about her current limitations. She began to question whether she would ever be the same soldier she had been before. Her sleep was frequently interrupted by nightmares about the attack. She would wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the sound of the explosion and feeling the impact against the wall. During the day, sudden loud noises made her jump and caused her heart to race. Sarah recognized these as symptoms of trauma, but she was determined not to let them define her or limit her future in the military. The other soldiers at the base treated her with a mixture of respect and pity that Sarah found difficult to accept. She wanted to be seen as a warrior who had survived a dangerous mission, not as a victim who needed special treatment. The gap between how others perceived her and how she saw herself continued to grow, creating a sense of isolation that was almost as painful as her physical wounds. 2 months after the attack, Sarah felt ready to return to active duty. Her physical therapy had progressed well, and she had regained most of her strength and mobility. The scars on her back and arms were still visible, but Dr. Chen had cleared her for all normal activities. Sarah was eager to rejoin her squad and prove that she was still the capable soldier she had always been. When Sarah requested to return to patrol duties, her application had to go through Colonel Harrison for approval. She prepared carefully for their meeting, rehearsing what she would say and anticipating his questions. Sarah wanted to demonstrate her readiness both physically and mentally to resume her role as a frontline soldier. The colonel's office was spartanly decorated with military awards, maps of the region, and photographs from his various deployments. Colonel Harrison sat behind his metal desk, reviewing Sarah's medical records and performance evaluations. He looked up when she entered and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him. His expression was serious and unreadable. Sarah presented her case with confidence, explaining how her recovery had progressed and highlighting her excellent scores on recent fitness tests. She emphasized her desire to return to her unit and her belief that she could perform her duties without any limitations. The colonel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on the papers in front of him. When Sarah finished speaking, Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. He asked about her sleep patterns, whether she had experienced any psychological effects from the attack, and how she felt about returning to potentially dangerous situations. Sarah answered honestly, but emphasized her mental toughness and determination to continue serving. Then Colonel Harrison brought up the issue that Sarah had been dreading. He expressed concerns about whether she could handle the physical demands of combat operations, particularly given the nature of her injuries. He mentioned that carrying full equipment loads and maintaining peak performance during extended missions required complete physical capability. Sarah assured him that she had passed all the required fitness tests and that her doctors had found no lasting impairments. She explained that she had been training harder than ever to ensure she could meet every physical standard. The colonel acknowledged her effort but remained skeptical about her readiness for the most demanding assignments. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Colonel Harrison suggested that Sarah might be better suited for training new recruits or working in intelligence analysis. He argued that her experience in combat would be valuable in these roles and that she could continue serving her country without risking further injury. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized he was essentially offering her a desk job. Sarah respectfully but firmly declined the colonel's suggestion. She explained that she had joined the military to serve in combat roles, and that she felt a responsibility to her squad members who were still conducting dangerous missions. She argued that removing experienced soldiers from active duty because of injuries would weaken the unit's overall effectiveness. Colonel Harrison's expression hardened as Sarah continued to press her case. He reminded her that military decisions were not democratic, and that her personal preferences were less important than unit readiness and safety. He suggested that her attachment to combat roles might be clouding her judgment about her own limitations. The meeting ended without a clear resolution. Colonel Harrison said he would review her request and consult with other officers before making a final decision. Sarah left his office feeling frustrated and uncertain about her future. She had expected some resistance, but the colonel's skepticism seemed to go beyond reasonable caution. Over the next few days, Sarah waited anxiously for word about her status. She continued her training routine, pushing herself even harder to demonstrate her physical readiness. Other soldiers noticed her dedication and offered encouragement, but Sarah could sense that some shared the colonel's doubts about her return to active duty. The uncertainty was almost worse than being denied outright. A week after her meeting with Colonel Harrison, Sarah received orders to report to his office again. She hoped this meant he had approved her request to return to active duty, but his serious expression when she entered suggested otherwise. The colonel had made his decision, and it was not what Sarah wanted to hear. Colonel Harrison informed Sarah that her request for return to patrol duties had been denied. He explained that while her medical clearance was noted, he had concerns about her ability to perform under the extreme stress of combat situations. He mentioned reports from other officers who had observed her during training exercises and felt she was not yet ready for full operational status. Sarah was stunned by this decision. She asked for specific examples of her supposed deficiencies, but the colonel remained vague, citing general concerns about her reaction times and decision-making under pressure. Sarah felt that these criticisms were unfair and not supported by her actual performance during training sessions. The colonel offered Sarah a position in the base communications center, where she would coordinate radio traffic and monitor intelligence reports. While important work, it was far from the frontline combat role she desired. Sarah realized that accepting this assignment would likely end her hopes of returning to active patrol duties. At least during this deployment, Sarah requested permission to speak freely, and when the colonel granted it, she expressed her strong disagreement with his assessment. She pointed out that she had consistently met or exceeded all physical and mental performance standards since her injury. She argued that keeping experienced combat soldiers in rear positions weakened the unit's overall capability. Colonel Harrison's response was sharp and dismissive. He stated that his primary responsibility was the safety and effectiveness of all personnel under his command. He suggested that Sarah's eagerness to return to combat might be affecting her judgment and that she needed to accept the limitations that came with her injury experience. The conversation became more heated as Sarah continued to argue her case. She felt that the colonel was making assumptions about her capabilities based on outdated stereotypes about wounded soldiers. Sarah believed that her experience surviving the attack had actually made her a more valuable and resilient team member, not a liability. Colonel Harrison ended the discussion by making it clear that his decision was final. He ordered Sarah to report to the communications center the following morning and warned her that continued resistance to his orders could result in disciplinary action. Sarah saluted and left his office feeling angry and defeated. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, trying to process what had happened. She felt that her military career was being derailed by one man's prejudices and misconceptions. The idea of spending the rest of her deployment monitoring radio traffic while her teammates faced danger without her was almost unbearable. Sarah considered her options, which seemed limited. She could accept the assignment and hope for better opportunities in the future, or she could request a transfer to another unit where her combat experience might be more valued. Neither choice felt satisfactory, and both carried risks to her long-term military career. The most frustrating aspect of the situation was Sarah's belief that the colonel had never given her a fair chance to prove herself. His decision seemed based on assumptions rather than evidence, and she felt powerless to change his mind. The military hierarchy that she had always respected now felt like an obstacle to her professional goals. As Sarah prepared for bed, she made a decision that would change everything. She would not simply accept the colonel's assessment and fade into a support role. Instead, she would find a way to demonstrate her capabilities in a manner that could not be ignored or dismissed. She just needed to figure out how to make that happen without ending her military career in the process. Sarah's opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days into her new assignment at the communications center, an emergency situation developed that would test everyone on the base. A patrol unit had become pinned down by enemy fire in a remote valley, and their radio operator had been wounded, limiting their ability to communicate their exact position for evacuation. The base communications center became the nerve center for coordinating the rescue operation. Multiple helicopters, ground units, and air support were involved, all requiring precise coordination to avoid friendly fire incidents. Sarah found herself managing radio traffic from 6 different units simultaneously, a task that required exceptional skill and concentration. As the situation developed, It became clear that the standard rescue protocols were not working. The enemy had positioned themselves in caves and rocky outcroppings that provided excellent cover, while limiting the effectiveness of air support. The trapped patrol was running low on ammunition and had multiple wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. Ray noticed a pattern in the enemy radio communications that the intelligence analysts had missed. Her months of studying local dialects and communication codes during her recovery had given her insights that others lacked. She realized that the enemy fighters were coordinating their positions using a specific frequency that could be jammed, potentially disrupting their defensive coordination. When Sarah brought this information to the attention of the operations officer, he initially dismissed her suggestion. He pointed out that she was assigned to basic communications duties and should focus on her assigned tasks rather than trying to analyze intelligence data. Sarah persisted, explaining the technical details of what she had observed and the potential tactical advantages. The situation was becoming more desperate by the hour. Weather conditions were deteriorating, making helicopter operations more dangerous, and the trapped patrol reported that enemy reinforcements appeared to be arriving. Traditional rescue approaches were proving ineffective, and time was running out to save the soldiers who were depending on them. Finally, the operations officer agreed to test Sarah's theory about jamming the enemy communications. Within minutes of implementing her suggestion, the coordinated enemy fire began to break down. The fighters in different positions started acting independently rather than as a unified force, creating opportunities for the rescue helicopters to approach more safely. Sarah continued monitoring all communication channels while coordinating the complex rescue operation. She directed air support to specific targets, guided ground units around enemy positions, and maintained contact with the trapped patrol throughout the operation. Her ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously proved crucial to the mission's success. As the rescue helicopters extracted the wounded soldiers, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing since her injury. She had not only performed her assigned duties competently, but had made a critical contribution to saving the lives of fellow soldiers. The operations officer publicly acknowledged her role in the successful mission. Word of Sarah's performance during the rescue operation spread quickly throughout the base. Soldiers who had participated in the mission spoke about her tactical insights and communication skills. Even some officers who had previously supported Colonel Harrison's decision began to question whether Sarah's talents were being properly utilized. Colonel Harrison learned about Sarah's contribution to the rescue mission through official reports and informal conversations with other officers. He had not been directly involved in the operation, having been attending a meeting with senior command at another base. When he returned and heard the details, his expression was unreadable, but Sarah could sense his surprise. The successful rescue operation had changed the dynamics on the base in subtle but important ways. Sarah had proven that her combat experience and analytical skills made her valuable in ways that went beyond physical capabilities. She had demonstrated leadership and expertise under pressure, qualities that the military valued highly. However, Sarah knew that one successful mission would not automatically change Colonel Harrison's opinion about her fitness for combat duties. She had gained respect from her peers and some officers, but the colonel still held the authority to determine her assignments. The question now was whether this demonstration of her capabilities would be enough to convince him to reconsider his previous decision. The morning after the successful rescue operation, Colonel Harrison called Sarah to his office once again. This time, his demeanor was different, less dismissive but still skeptical. He had read the after-action reports and heard from multiple sources about her performance during the crisis. However, he remained unconvinced that this single incident proved her readiness for regular combat operations. Colonel Harrison acknowledged Sarah's contribution to the rescue mission, but emphasized that communications work was different from frontline combat. He argued that while her analytical skills were valuable, the physical and psychological demands of patrol duties remained his primary concern. He questioned whether her performance under controlled conditions at the base would translate to effectiveness in unpredictable combat situations. Sarah listened respectfully but felt frustrated by the colonel's continued resistance. She had proven her abilities under pressure and had saved lives through her actions, yet he still seemed determined to keep her in a support role. Sarah realized that conventional arguments about her fitness would not change his mind. and she needed to take a more direct approach. Standing in front of the colonel's desk, Sarah made a decision that surprised both of them. Without asking permission, she began removing her military jacket, revealing the scars that covered her left shoulder, arm, and back. The wounds had healed well, but the marks told the story of the explosion that had nearly ended her career and could have cost her life. Colonel Harrison was visibly startled by Sarah's action. He had read the medical reports, but seeing the actual extent of her injuries was different from reading clinical descriptions. The scars were extensive, covering areas where shrapnel and debris had torn through her body armor and embedded in her flesh. Some were thin lines from surgical procedures, while others were broader marks where deeper wounds had required extensive treatment. Sarah spoke quietly but with conviction as she displayed her wounds. She explained that these scars represented her sacrifice for her fellow soldiers and her country. She had not sought these injuries, but she had survived them and grown stronger as a result. She argued that her willingness to face danger despite having experienced its consequences proved her commitment rather than her weakness. The room was completely silent as Sarah continued speaking. She pointed to specific scars and explained how each had been acquired, the pain she had endured during recovery, and the determination that had driven her through months of rehabilitation. She emphasized that these marks were evidence of her courage and resilience, not reasons to doubt her capabilities. Colonel Harrison found himself unable to maintain his skeptical stance in the face of this powerful demonstration. The clinical reports had not conveyed the reality of what Sarah had endured and overcome. He began to understand that his concerns about her psychological readiness might have been based on assumptions rather than evidence. Her willingness to confront her trauma so directly suggested remarkable mental strength. Sarah put her jacket back on and stood at attention, waiting for the colonel's response. She had taken a significant risk by challenging his authority so directly, but she felt that dramatic action was necessary to break through his preconceptions. The silence stretched for several moments as Colonel Harrison processed what he had witnessed. Finally, Colonel Harrison spoke. He admitted that he had perhaps been too quick to judge Sarah's readiness based on standard protocols rather than individual assessment. He acknowledged that her experience and determination might indeed make her a more valuable soldier rather than a liability. However, he also emphasized that any return to active duty would need to be gradual and carefully monitored. The colonel proposed a compromise that surprised Sarah. He would approve her return to limited patrol duties, starting with short-range missions close to the base. Her performance would be closely evaluated, and if she demonstrated continued effectiveness, her duties could be expanded. Sarah accepted this offer immediately, knowing it represented the opportunity she had been fighting for. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt a mixture of relief and determination. She had finally broken through the barriers that had kept her from the work she loved, but she knew that the real test was still ahead. She would need to prove herself again in the field, demonstrating that her scars represented strength rather than weakness. The other soldiers at the base had heard rumors about Sarah's confrontation with the colonel, though few knew the specific details. When word spread that she had been cleared to return to patrol duties, many expressed their support and excitement about having her back on their team. Sergeant Williams welcomed her back with genuine enthusiasm, saying the squad had never been the same without her. Sarah's story became a powerful example throughout the base of determination overcoming adversity. Her willingness to fight for her right to serve despite the obstacles she faced inspired other soldiers who were dealing with their own challenges. She had proven that true strength came not from avoiding difficulties, but from facing them with courage and refusing to give up on one's goals.